Hi, all. I am Renee Goddess. I am a member of the Maine Women's Lobby Board, and I am on the planning committee for this event. How can we make sure the people most harmed by bad public policy are centered in discussion of power, policy, and change? LaTosha Brown is leading this work in Georgia and beyond, and has expert wisdom to share with us today. An award-winning cultural activist, dynamic community organizer and political strategist, an internationally sought-after nonprofit and philanthropic consultant, and the principal owner of Truth Speaks Consulting, Inc., a philanthropy advisory consulting firm in Atlanta, Georgia. Ms. Brown is the co-founder of the voting rights group, Black Voters Matter, a power-building Southern-based civic engagement organization that has been noted for its work on the 2017 U.S. Senate special election in Alabama and its influence during the 2020-2021 Georgia state elections. Please research her. Please keep up with her. She is a founding member of the Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors Group Gulf Coast Fund for Community Renewal and Ecological Health, and also served as the fund's first executive director, Boss Lady. Under her leadership, the Gulf Coast Fund gained national recognition, created strategic national partnerships, and most importantly, distributed over $6 million in re-granting dollars for community and coastal organizations in the Gulf Coast regions. This is a boss lady creating systemic change. She is the founder of the Southern Black Women Organizing Project that works for strengthening the network of Black women grassroots leaders in the South, and Saving Ourselves Coalition, a community-led disaster relief organization that helped hundreds of families in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. Ms. Brown's expertise and dedication for over 2 decades is in improving the outcomes, conditions, and opportunities for those who are least well off socially, economically, and politically. She has distinguished herself as a trusted expert and resource in political strategy, rural development, and special programming. Her success in social justice, economic development, leadership development, wealth creation, and civil rights are impeccable standards that she has set. And as majority colonizers on Wabanaki territory, we need to pay close attention to this living ancestor and systems game changer. When I found out she was a jazz singer, of course I went to the Googles. I expected to find homestyle clips of Auntie LaTosha singing in church, or maybe a delicious Atlanta hotspot. I hope that it's okay that I call you Auntie Miss Brown. What I found was songs of the soul of Black folks. The Googles enticed me with pieces of an album that sound a lot like the music that I grew up with in an African Methodist Episcopal Zion church right here in Abenaki land. In her own words about the album, 2020 marks the 55th anniversary of the Voting Act movement that took place in my native city of Selma, Alabama. This album is a tribute to the Negro spirituals and freedom songs that gave life to that movement. I want to capture this spirit and remind the world that these songs lift up all of humanity. Ms. Brown sees something happening she calls the South is rising. People want change. They are connecting specifically to more progressive candidates. She fiercely believes that people can hold the power and that communities can be organized in such a way that the political infrastructure belongs to communities, a complete reverse of the systems and structures we see now. Instead, the community supports the candidates who become the elected officials who come directly out of the community experience. When asked about confronting power as poor rural communities head on and not caring about the consequences on MSNBC, Ms. Brown so beautifully explained, I think you have to have a delicate balance because in many of these rural communities, their positions of power are very interconnected in terms of the politics and the economics. And there are usually repercussions, particularly in rural communities. Ms. Brown knows that democracy is 365 days a year. She never stops building her base. She never stops connecting her folks. And she is working hard to build lasting power. Y'all, please, without further ado, a delicious welcome to Miss LaTosha Love Brown.
Let me say that is the absolute best introduction I have ever received in my entire life. And I am so sincere about this. It's wonderful to see you all, but Sister Renee, I am like, did I say that? I was like, I did say that, didn't I? One, your passion to take I can't tell you how much your introduction means to me. You know, normally people are just reading off paper, but I felt the love, I felt the intention, I felt the spirit behind it. That right there is capturing, that is the highest honor that I could possibly ever have. I just want you to know that I'm sincerely saying that from my heart, because it came from your heart, it came from your spirit, it came from the overflow of your creativity. And so I know that I'm supposed to go into my talk, but I'm so moved and inspired by what you just did, that you know, I feel in many ways that we're all looking for this, that we're all looking to be seen and to be heard. We all want to make sure that who we are, the integrity of who we are, that as people kind of share it in that space. And so, Renee, I'll just say, sister, you did an exceptional job at setting the tone for that. And so thank you. I love you. I'm very grateful for you. And sister, I can't wait to see you shine and soar, because you are over there doing it. So I know that's very different, but I had to stop. I'm speechless in many ways. Not just because the words, it's the spirit and the intent behind the words, you know, and while that's technically not what my talk is about, that's exactly what my talk is about. That's exactly what my talk is about, that there are ways that women show up in spaces, that we show up in the fullness of our power, that we show up bringing the fullness of our creativity, our energy, our love, our insight, our passion. That's the thing that's going to change the world, y'all. Like, it is not for us to like, how can we be more acceptable to the men folk, or how can we be more stoic? But it's when we bring the fullness of our spirit of who we are, that is ultimately what is going to change the world. So given that I'm LaTosha Brown, I am a child of the Deep South. I am a Rosetta's daughter, and Nellie and Joseph Gamble's granddaughter, and Isaac and Mary Lynn Brown's granddaughter, both from Mississippi and Alabama. And so when I say I'm Deep South, I'm Deep South, and I currently live in Georgia. I raise that in a kind of context because even as I'm looking at the screen, as I'm talking to you all today, you know, Renee has just opened me up in many ways. Thank you with that introduction around the centering of who we are. And so I know this is a conference to talk about, you know, kind of policy and where we're going, but I really want to just ground this conversation, this next 40 minutes, and that's really thinking about who we are individually, who we are collectively, who we are as a collective humanity. Because ultimately, I believe the key of shifting is in the understanding of that. That is the thing that is going to change. It's not going policy without people don't work, y'all. It doesn't, right? And so at the end of the day, we have to really be able to center everything that we're doing in the love of humanity and even how we see ourselves. And so as I get ready to start, I really want to just get us all in alignment in this space, since I feel like, Renee, you've set the tone. You know, I want, wherever you are right now, one, thank you all for having me, and thank you all for providing this space, and spending your time with me this morning and inviting me to your space. What I would like to do, though, I always do this, but I'm seeing the question a little bit differently. Wherever you are, I'm going to ask us before we get started to kind of just get settled in your seat, wherever you're sitting. I want us to get centered because I want us to hear each other differently. I want us to move a little bit differently. And I want you to kind of shake off whatever it is the day is starting. It's a beautiful day. That's why, y'all see the flowers? That's why I wanted to come in with flowers to literally just kind of get centered in this talk and this discussion. Kind of see your feet as if you were a tree, and these are your roots to the ground. And then let's see like your head, like just open, like you're open to receive, but your head has a screen, you're open to receive, kind of the light that comes from above, and you allow it to travel through your body where truth will resonate. Those things that are not true, they will just dissipate. And so in that space, I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to imagine with me real quick. And I want you to listen to this question with your heart. And my question to you is, what would the state of Maine look like if people were able to operate in the fullness of their power? What would this nation look like if human beings felt respected, valued, and honored? What would the world look like if we centered the love of humanity? Now open your eyes. I don't know how many of y'all were able to see something. Some of y'all on screen, if you all were able to see a glimpse of anything, raise your hand. If you found it, really, thank you. I see you, Elsa. And Desti. If it was really, really hard, thank you, Marion. Very, very hard to see something. And there's no right or wrong. It's just, it was really challenging to see something. Raise your hand. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Regina. If you were kind of stuck with the question, if the question, you didn't quite know what to do with the questions, anybody had that feeling? I see you, Kate. Thank you, Kate and Emily. So I'm raising that, and Angela, thank you. Now I want us to do this one more time, and I want you to kind of prepare for this question. Just join me once again. I want you to close your eyes, and then I'm going to ask you another question. And I want you to hear the question with your heart. What would America look like without racism? What would America look like without racism? Now open your eyes. How many of y'all found that was a particularly difficult question? Oh, thank you. I see so many hands and fingers. Thank you all. The reason why I asked those questions, thank you. Thank you for being in this journey to kind of envision with me. The reason why I asked those questions, because those are the questions that we should be asking ourselves. Oftentimes we're kind of in this cerebral conversation around what policy we need. And yes, we need to have those conversations. But you know what's going to drive what that looks like? Those questions that I asked earlier. That is what is going to drive, because the truth of the matter is that until we actually envision something, it will never be brought into being. We will continue to go through this kind of hamster wheel of responding to things if we're not really centering what our solutions are in an actual vision. We will continue to respond to racism if we do not imagine a world without it. We will continue to respond to oppression and sexism if we cannot remember, if we cannot reimagine systems, right, that are literally centered in a feminist theory, that are centered in inclusivity. And so I'm raising this not as a point of a critique, but as an opportunity. That part of the way we have to really approach the work that we're doing. And even when we're talking about policy work, is one, it is going to require us to have a vision, or we will constantly be in a perpetual cycle of response. And we'll be responding to somebody else's limited vision. The truth of the matter is, all of us that are on here right now, that if our reference point is always the founders of this country, none of us would be here right now, because the founders of this country didn't believe that women actually had what was equality for women. Matter of fact, they didn't even believe that white men, if you didn't have land, had value. And they certainly didn't believe me as a Black woman and a person of color, that they could even, they were so limited in their view that they couldn't even recognize my humanity or the humanity of my ancestors. And so I say that while, yes, there was a contribution of really a vision that laid the foundation of this nation, we know that vision was severely limited and severely distorted. And so what I am offering to you, sisters, women of the world, women of change, what I am offering to you is to go on this journey with me to think differently, so that we're not showing up in these spaces just as citizens of a nation or as taxpayers. We should start thinking of ourselves as founders of a new nation, that we're going to create this reality of what this nation could look like when people are able to operate in the fullness of their power. How would you show up if you were empowered to operate in the fullness of your power? You've tasted it, you've seen it. You know when you've had a Superwoman moment or when you've had a Wonder Woman moment, you can feel it. You get up on the stage and you may say something, or you did something at work, or you wrote something and you like, oh, that was good. That was good. Or you say something and you give some advice and you're like, now that's good right there, right? You didn't need validation. It came from the deepest part of your power. And because it came out of your power, you recognize the value in it. And for a brief moment, you could see beyond even your own limitations. For a brief moment, you could actually see the literally superpower in yourself. Even beyond that could transcend your insecurities, that could transcend whatever circumstance, that can transcend. How many of y'all have been in a room with a bunch of men and you knew, and you dropped this idea and some man would take it or repeat it, but you knew that your idea, right? You weren't even caught up in the taking of the idea. You knew that your idea changed the whole frame. And I'm saying that not as a point of ego, I'm saying it as a point of that is what it looks like when we operate in the fullness of our power. And sometimes our power looks like quiet silence. I had a grandmother that could move the entire room by sitting in a chair and just looking at you a certain kind of way. She could reorganize the whole family by not saying anything. It was like, Mama didn't say anything, so I don't know if we should do this. That is when you're standing in the fullness of your power. And so I just wanted to set the tone around where we are and what the work that we've got to do in terms of going forward. And so I always share what I call this V strategy. There are 5 V's that I'm going to talk about. But as I get ready to talk about that, I just want to remind you, ladies, that we are in a particular kind of moment. We are in a moment that we can actually continue to be transactional, or we're in a moment that we could be transformative. And so one of the things that I was doing today, right, before I do a talk, because I'm not physically there, I like to physically be there, right? I like to at least have some connection around the place or know something about the place. And so I was looking up stats in Maine. I wanted to look up, because I know this is a conference at the intersection of how we're looking at civic engagement, how we're looking at economic opportunity. And so what was shocking is I'll be honest, when I looked up the stats the other day and I was looking at the stats of Maine, I thought Maine was a wealthy state. And so there is an element of Maine being wealthy, right? But then I was looking at the rankings, and many of the rankings are similar to the states in which I work in, that I'm from, which is the South. And so I'm like, here's a New England state, which is in a region that's one of the wealthiest regions of the nation. And so I was looking at the outline. I was looking at, well, how did How did, in many stats, Maine was 44th or 38th. And I'm not raising this as a critique. I'm raising it as it was actually shocking to me. And then I looked at it as one of the leading states. You know, one of the pieces that I saw, it was one of the, as you all know, I know I'm not telling you all anything new, it was a learning opportunity for me. That was one of the states that leads in manufacturing. That it was a state that had a strong history around that. And so part of that made me start thinking about why are we here? There's all kinds of reasons we can say why we're here, right? But the ultimate question is, where are we going? Thank you, Madison. You said it's often called the South. The South of, yes. Like literally, I was actually very, very surprised to see the South of the North. Yeah, I see some of the pieces. So, but there's a couple of things. So yeah, so while that was challenging, I got good news. And the good news is there's nowhere to go but up, right? That is good news. And I'm raising that in a context because my grandmother used to often say, and I'm a big grandmother's child. My grandmother would often say, where there is pain, there's great possibilities and promise. And so we need to actually see this moment in Maine, right? And where you all are at this moment in this world's history, in this nation's history, of the question is, how do we do a couple of things? How do we create a culture that we are literally creating a vision together of how we're going to think about Maine differently and move Maine differently? If there's anybody to do that, if Maine is going to be changed, it's because of the women. I'm telling you, there's enough evidence to state that if the women, right, are not ahead of this helm, it will not happen, y'all. Not because it's not possible, not because it's not good, great men out there, but if they could do it, they would have done it by now. Right. So I think that the opportunity exists where we can literally transform. You know, COVID came in a way, and I'm sending love out to each and every one of you. I don't know how you've been impacted or if you've been impacted directly with COVID. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge you, to acknowledge if your family has gone through it, acknowledge if you've gone through it yourself. We are here in this moment experiencing the largest global health pandemic in our lifetime. And many of us have been impacted in extraordinary ways. So I just want to just stop and acknowledge that and send you love for those of you that have been negatively impacted one way or the other, and your family by that. So I send my love and heart around that. But I also want to say, what is this question around what did COVID come to teach us? And how does this have anything to do with this conference? It has everything to do, because part of what COVID did is COVID did a couple of things. One, it forced us to slow down and stop. Two, it forced us to actually deal with, or at least for a brief opportunity, to look at everything differently. You know, I literally was in my house that I bought in 2007, right? And I feel like I just moved into my house. I start noticing things on the walls. I was like, wait a minute. I didn't know this room had this. Wait a minute. I've been treating my house almost like a hotel. And so sitting in the room, even in my office, I'm sitting in my office. I was like, no, this isn't practical. Let me do this because of this. And so I made my house, in this process of COVID, I've transformed my house basically into a home. Well, it's been a home, a hospital, a school, all kinds of things, right? Right. But literally to slow down and actually have to sit in it forced me to see some things that I weren't able to see, including the wall that needs to be painted and the room where I said I was going to get curtains 20 years ago that I never got curtains for, right? And so all of those things, that is one piece. The other piece, though, I think that COVID came to teach us is how interdependent we are and how we need each other. That at the end of the day, my health care, I can have excellent health care, but your health impacts my health and my health impacts your health. And collectively, if we're unable to actually see the collective vision around, we can create all kinds of artificial constructs that we want, from race to gender, all these other things that we want to create. But the bottom line is humanity is connected, like it or not. We cannot survive, thrive, and live without each other. That's just factual. And so that in many ways, and then the third and the final thing that I lift up with this is that it also is forcing us to relook at every single system. Many of us even met our partners and our children for the first time. We were like, wait a minute, I didn't know your learning style. I didn't know. We like, thank God for teachers, right? But many of us really were forced to sit in those things that we've been able to just kind of write off. And so I think it's really important for us to really think about reimagining this moment as a moment for us to do a reset and to reimagine. And so those 5 V's, I'm going to start with the first one. The first one is V for vision. What is your vision for Maine, individually and collectively? And so part of what happens often when I ask that question, people will start a vision based on what currently exists. I'm saying that I'm giving you permission to radically reimagine. You can abolish, change, shift, eliminate, create brand new systems. Do you all remember once upon a time where we didn't live with this? That there was something like a cell phone was the size of a big old bag, if you were lucky to have one, and it was $2,000, right? Every person you know. We went to Disneyland this past weekend and we couldn't even get on rides without a cell phone. I was like, well, how do they know we have a cell phone? They was like, because everybody got them. I was like, well, okay. The bottom line is things have shifted because the way that we communicate has shifted because someone envisioned something that did not exist, that was different. And I'm offering this to you all that as we're thinking about even public policy and we're thinking about economic interventions, it can't come at the expense of us really just responding to what already exists. Yes, there is one component to that, but we have to radically reimagine every single system. You know, when I think about here we are in a time period where we have the technology has increased productivity to so much that we've generated wealth, that so much that what we're looking at right now, you're looking at an individual on the way of being a trillionaire. Now, I like just think about that. Why is it that we've created a system that people are able to make so much money that they can just take a joy trip to the moon, but people who are working every single day can't pay their rent? Something is off. I'm not mad at the person going to the moon because I probably would like to go to the moon one day myself. But the bottom line is that on some level, we have to recognize that something is out of whack when we literally have an economic system that allows others to really set the context and the strategy for the rest of the world. Like, it should not be that basic needs are met because of benevolence or funding. Why can't we just create an economic system that the basic needs are met? And then, yes, make your money and go play and go to Mars and let's do those things. That's fine. But at the end of the day, what is so, and part of this, ladies, is because we've got to really recognize a couple of things. One, we've got to really understand we're in a narrative war. That if to hear it tell, I don't know if you all remember, some of us years ago, where the person who actually broke America was the Black woman on welfare. That was the narrative. When in fact, if you took it was not only was it distorted and it was a lie, but the truth of the matter is there are more white people on welfare, white women, than Black women. So one, it was misstretched. And if you put everybody who had received some kind of welfare, right, that would not even touch the tax break from one company like an Amazon. But the narrative was that and part of the narrative has been on demonizing based on gender, based on race, based on economic mobility. People are poor because they don't work hard enough. People are poor because they don't really care about their circumstance. And as long as that's the narrative, we don't have to really deal with the issue of really looking at, is the tax structure fair? Are we creating policy in a way that I want people to have, yes, I want everybody to have is whatever you want to do and money, if you want to, yes, I want people to prosper. But I want there to be some equity in how we think about prosperity, because I can't see prosperity in a space where it's okay for during a pandemic where some people lost everything that they own. Other people got tripled and quadrupled their wealth. There is something fundamentally wrong. But we can't get to that unless we have a different conversation. And so when we're talking about economic opportunity, one, let's start from a premise of what we all know about. We know women. Let's talk about this last election cycle when there's so many people that finally discovered, kind of like Columbus discovered America, people finally discovered Black women. Like people discovered us last year for some reason. You know, we've been here all the while, but we got discovered last year. And in that context, right, while we were a driver around the political landscape last year, 68% of Black women are wage workers. Do we know that literally the losses, the economic loss from 2020, almost 100% of that were women? And so we have to really recognize, I'm raising that not as a problem, I want you to hear it as an opportunity. And what is it that exists in the opportunity? There's a couple of things going to my 5 B's. The first B is around the vision. What is your vision of what can we reimagine even what a work week looks like? What is the magic number of 40? Why do people have to work 40 hours a week? Why could we not, if we got the means of production? Just think about it, ladies. We got the means of production that are increasing things. So that what used to take 1,000 people to make, let's say 10 cars, now it takes, let's say 100 people. You know what we've done? We've said, okay, since it only takes 100 people, we're going to lay off 900 people, right? Keep this 100 people and the company's going to make more money. What if we kept all 1,000 people, had those 1,000 people work 10 hours a week and made more money? That same piece could work. All that is a matter of how you distribute the resources. That is possible. And so I'm raising that because we've got to think in terms of possibilities of what exists. And I know folks say, well, you know, that's never going to happen. Why not? Somebody came up with 40 hours a week. There are companies, there are countries now that are actually only working, I think it's Norway, 4 days out of the week, because they're actually finding that it's actually more productive for people to work less. We're now talking about, oh, all of these shortages of jobs and people don't want to go back to work. I'm not mad at them. At the end of the day, what they're saying is, in this break, what they're saying is you need to pay me. If these companies, instead of the narrative being that people don't want to work, the narrative should be companies need to pay. If they pay people fairly, guess what? People will come to work. So there's a shifting that is happening because our natural is to go back to what we know that is familiar, even though we know what is familiar has not gotten us where we need or what we want. So women of Maine, what shall it be? What shall be the vision to take us forward in the next iteration of government? What is needed? We cannot just continue to operate from a space of, we have to see public policy in 2 ways, and economic policy in 2 ways. There's in harm reduction, which means in the here and now, people are actually experiencing economic harm and need economic opportunity. So we have to actually advocate and fight for those policies that are going to impact to make sure that we're reducing the harm that's happening to people now. But if we stay there, guess what? We will continually be in this perpetual hamster wheel, which we're in. It's like we're stuck. I don't know if you all are big. I'm a big fan of Dr. Strange. Anybody know anything about Dr. Strange? I love the Avengers, y'all. But Dr. Strange, there is a movie Dr. Strange is in, with the Dr. Strange film, and in there's a part that he actually goes to the demon. I can't remember what his name is, the demon god, and he's in this perpetual loop. What he does is he creates this perpetual loop in the multiverse that runs this demon god or whoever he is. It runs him crazy. It's to the point where he actually surrenders. Like, okay, I'm gonna give you what you want. Like, just stop having me go in this loop. I feel like him. I am so tired of this loop. We keep going around the loop because we're responding. We're not reimagining. That is the difference. And so I'm going to ask you all in the vision component that we have to think about this in the context of how do we radically reimagine every single system. How do we reimagine what a work day looks like? How do we reimagine what work requires? Why do we have this notion? I woke up, it's interesting. My claim to fame for myself is you can't outwork me. My entire life, I've said, oh no, you can't outwork me. You can't outorganize me. And I meant that, right? And probably about this might be the wisdom that comes with 50. So women who have not turned 50 yet, you have to believe the women who are 50. I promise you something. There is a I don't give a darn switch that kicks on at 50. I don't know where it comes from, but it is real. Right. And so I remember laying in my bed and was one morning, I turned 50 last year, and I was laying in my bed and I was saying, you know what? I don't want to be the hardest worker anymore. I want to work. I want to be effective. I want to be impactful. I don't have to be the hardest anymore, right? And it took me 50 years to actually deal with this piece that I had held up as my crown and glory, that I was the hardest worker. And I'm laying in the middle of the bed and was like, I don't want to be her anymore. I don't want to be the hardest worker. I want to be impactful, and I want to be happy, and I want to be balanced. And I had never even said that before, because in my in my community, what I'm often told is that I've got to work twice as hard, right? I've got, in order to make it, I've got to be the first one in and the last one out. And part of that narrative has been driven by people who literally don't even believe in that. They just need us to work like that, right, ladies? And so I'm saying that what COVID has come to do, we can even reimagine work. People are not going back to the offices because they don't want to work in offices anymore. Some folks are saying, I've been the most productive. It was hard at first. I have a friend that said it was hard at first, but I'm so productive at home. I'm happier. I feel more secure. I'm more productive at home. And so at the end of the day, we are reimagining and reorganizing what life could be. And so I'm saying this with you all, that this is the moment, ladies. This is the moment, friends. This is the moment that we have to take time to be visionaries. We cannot just continue to respond to what exists. And so instead of just responding, what are we going to do? We're going to radically reimagine. And we're going to even push ourselves on reimagining, even for ourselves. What in your life can you radically reimagine and do something different? Listen, I am the first one to say, as a change maker, I say this all the time. When I went to the grocery store and they moved the spice aisle, I almost had a heart attack. I was like, wait, what happened? The world is, oh my goodness, what is happening to the world, right? Because we are wired not to really like change, but the possibilities exist in the change, y'all. The possibilities don't exist in the comfort and what we know. It is in the change. And so I just want to encourage us, the first V, around being visionaries and radically reimagining. The second V, is around how do we use our voice? Voices matter. This whole notion of sticks and stones, it hurt my bones, but words will never hurt me. That's the biggest lie ever been told. The truth of the matter is there's never been any conflict on this earth that was not started with words were involved, ever, including wars. And so I think it's really important for us to really recognize the power of voice. And when I say the power of voice, I don't mean the power of, yes, I'm just going to share my opinion. I think it's the power of how do we tap into what people want and people need. If we're doing work in community, then guess where I think the solutions are really engaged in community. And so part of the work that I do at Black Voters Matter, before we started, you know what we did? We did a 7-month listening tour. We went out to communities and we did circles and we listened to people, so that as we were creating and crafting policy or our agendas, that it was actually being informed, but informed in a real way. Because oftentimes what will happen is that we will project, and what we're really looking for is we're just looking for people to affirm what it is that we already think that they need, instead of really digging ourselves, creating a space that we can actually hear what people need. And so I'm encouraging you all that in this process that we're talking about economic opportunities, let's listen to people around and push ourselves and each other around literally using our voice to lift those things up. If it's wrong, we have a responsibility of speaking to it and speaking against it. We all know that. I mean, let's go to COVID, another lesson of COVID. You know, here we are bragging that we're in the wealthiest country in the world. We ought to be ashamed of ourselves to brag that we're in the wealthiest country in the world. And we can't figure out how to give healthcare to every person. And let me ask this, what's so wrong with I still do not understand what is so bad with every person getting healthcare. Some sick people to get well. I mean, I don't understand. You know, we spend more on warheads. We have the capacity. What we don't have is we don't have the will. And that's why I'm using voice, because if we're in a narrative war, the narrative matters. So each of you all, wherever you sit, whether it's in a university, whether it's at a nonprofit, whether it's in community, it is important that you are lifting and shaping the voice of those spaces that often are not said, that we've got to challenge the traditional way of approaching problems, that we've got to actually offer something different, which is why I'm asking you all to radically reimagine. And we've got to give voice to that. And we've got to actually be able to speak those things that are different. And so that is the second piece. The third piece around, you know, is I think it's important for us to shift. The third V is around victory. How do we see victory? You know, in America, we've gotten to the point right now that we see it it's almost like we're in a big Super Bowl. You on the blue team or the red team? Which team you on? Which team's gonna win the Super Bowl, right? I'm not on the blue team or the red team. I'm on the human team. I'm with the human beings that care about humanity. That's what team I'm on. And whatever policy parties that actually can shift that, they work for me. I don't work for them. I don't have to choose a side. This ain't their game. They're just a game. I am in what is called, I'm living a real whole life. I got a whole human life and experiences. And no, I'm not in your football game. And I'm not in your male ego. And no, I'm not blue or red. No, I'm a human being. The question is, right, what is it? And it's kind of like the Janet Jackson, right? What have you done for me lately? We have to really shift this perspective of that we work for electeds or we work for political parties. They work for us. And we have to shift that and not allow ourselves to be in this space of we see victory. In order for me to win, you have to lose. No, I'm far more creative than that. And as women, we're far more creative than that. Children teach us that. Children teach us. They humble us on how there can be a win-win for everything. I was at Disney this weekend and I saw a woman taking a selfie of herself holding one baby on the side and had a bottle with the other one in the thing. She was like, everybody's going to be happy right now. I'm going to take my picture. This baby's going to be all right. And this one's going to be fed. The bottom line, women, if nobody else has figured out how to multitask, that when we see a victory, we're going to find a way for everybody to have a win-win. We can figure that out. And so I'm raising that in a serious note that we have to really look at policy in a way that really we're shifting our perspective around what a victory looks like. And not just in the policy win as political parties, but really what it looks like, which means that there's some things that may be uncomfortable for us because we don't like change either. Yet it is, in order to get a different outcome, it is going to require us shifting and letting go of some things that we're familiar with. You can't hold up justice and racism at the same time. It doesn't work. They cancel each other out. And so it's really important for us to really think about what the possibilities that exist if we're operating in a way that we're shifting the paradigm of what a victory looks like. And that I recognize that your victory actually helps me. And you know, it's the same principle. That's why I love the humanity thing. It's the same principle of what happens when we're watching the Olympics. Why we love the Olympics, it's some way, even if we want our team to win, there's something about that person wearing the gold that we're proud of them. They may be from Uzbekistan, right? But there's something that makes us proud because we like to see. There's something in us that likes to see human beings operate at their highest. And so let's have that standard for ourselves, even around the policy piece. Then I'll go to the next V. You know, I think it's important for us to vision. It's important for us to use our voice. It is important for us to really shift the way that we see victory. But I think all of this rests on a solid foundation of what I think the biggest challenge that we're facing in this country, that you're facing, is really a question around values. And I'm not talking about we're going to create, oh, we've got certain values. I'm not values that are really connected to people's prejudice. I mean, just some values like human values. Some values like, can human beings just have the right to live a quality life? Shouldn't that be a value? Shouldn't that be a value that every single policy decision that's being made is rooted in the notion of, for the love of humanity, of advancing humanity? Are we so lack of creativity and innovation that we can't figure out a system in the wealthiest country in the world that people can have housing and can have food and medical care? What is so terrible about that? We can figure out $1 trillion for a war, but we can't figure out how to give people housing. It has nothing to do with it's impossible in the system. It has to do, we've got to shift political will. And that will has to be driven not just about my individual thoughts, but that will has to be driven by something that is greater than all of us. And it is what our values are, what my value is in humanity. That has to shape it. We have the tools, we have the intellect, we have the resources. What we do not have is the political will. And so part of that has to be in our frame as well. We have to literally get back to a value-centered frame that is not about the blue team or the red team or this elected or that elected, but it's really around what happened if all of ourselves ask the question, this is in the best interest of humanity, not in the best interest of me. You know, I'm just going to pick on them because I'm picking on them right now, right? But Bezos could not possibly think that their decisions that would cause him to be a trillionaire is in the best interest of his workers. You can't possibly think that. But if you ask the question, what is in the best interest of humanity, you could still continue to be rich. I mean, I don't think nothing wrong with being you still got billions on billions. There's a whole lot of space between that and a trillionaire. There's a whole lot of space. There's a whole lot of stuff you can buy, right? Right. What's so wrong with everybody being in a system that we're all valued and respected and honored? And yes, I'm quite sure he works very hard. I'm quite sure he worked very hard to get where he got. But are you saying your workers don't? And I'm raising this not as, I'm really not picking on him. I'm raising this just as an example because most of us know the context and the story around it. So I'm raising it as a larger issue because I'm not really picking on him. I'm actually raising this as a mirror for us. If we're operating in the same kind of frame that says I should have more because I work harder than everybody else, therein lies a problem around values. If we believe that it's okay for us we want to live in a house of comfort. And I'm not saying everybody got to have a 5-bedroom mansion, but people having basic quality housing, what's so bad with that? And so the last thing that I'll raise is the final V is really centered in voting. It's how do we civically engage in a way. Part of what we did with Black Voters Matters, we had to shift the frame, that the frame couldn't be about the politicians. It couldn't be about the political parties. All those were variables that made a difference. But we had to shift the frame that we centered people. And we actually said it's about us. And so as you all are doing this work to get people centered, engaged civically in the process, it has to be rooted in very differently. It can't just be the same voting process that is really transactional. It has to be done in a way that's transformative. And one of the ways to start with that is to shift the paradigm of how you're talking to people about voting. That we're not asking people to believe in a system that every day they know that it is discriminatory, that every day that they know that they're prejudiced, and every single day that they feel the weight of it, right? We're asking people to believe in themselves, in their own agency, in their own power. And so I think it's really important in this process that we shift the paradigm of how we're talking about voting. We have to start talking to people about voting from the frame of operating and using their agency. And that if any decision is going to be made by you and your family, you have a right to be a part of that decision-making process, shouldn't you? And so as we're going forward, those 5 V's, vision, we've got to be visionaries. We have to radically reimagine how we're going to move forward. Voice, we have to create grace and space, but we have to create platforms so that voices, those voices that have been marginalized, have the opportunity to come together and dream and to think. It is hard for me to be imaginative and creative when my lights are about to be cut off. I've literally been driving before and forgot to put gas in the car. And I was dating, this is a side story. And I was dating this guy who had asked me about my tires. He told me that I needed to get my back tires checked. And I went on this trip, long story short. I ran out of gas. Why I called him, I don't know. I don't know what I thought he was gonna do. But anyway, I called him and he said, even though he's a good guy, I called him and he asked me, he was like, yeah, he was like, did you get your tires? I was like, tires? Who's thinking about tires? I'm trying to figure out how to get gas right now. That's the last thing on my mind. It's the same thing of when we're talking to people about in communities around, we want them to think about something else without acknowledging in the moment what they're dealing with. They're visionaries. They just need to make sure that they're getting their basic needs met and addressed so that they have the freedom to vision. I'm very creative. When my bills are paid and I've got $5 in my pocket and my belly is full and I'm sitting by the fireplace, I am so imaginative, y'all. And others are as well. And so I'm raising this, that we've got to create those spaces for people as well. That when we're talking about how we're going to use literally the shift of what a victory looks like, how we're going to literally be able to use a frame that centers human values. And don't take that lightly. I'm not just saying that just to say that. I don't believe that, listen, I'm not one of those people that I believe there's going to be a utopian society. I don't even agree with my own self in a week, right? So there's going to always be differences. I don't think the issue is we don't know how to get along. I think the issue is we don't know how to be different. We don't know how to operate together in our differences. We don't know how to fight in a way that still honors each other's humanity. We don't know how to differ in a way that literally says, yes, I differ from you, right, in this way, but if we all had a shared value in the love of humanity, we would still have different ideas, but the way that we would move would be very differently, because what would center us is this love for humanity. Even though I might think it needs this and you may think it needs this, the way that we engage in it wouldn't be, let's see who kills the most people and that person wins. So wrapping this all up, because I know that we're going to be in conversation, and I'm looking forward to being engaged with you all in this larger conversation. I just want to raise that if you don't remember anything that I've said in the last 40 minutes, I want you to remember and to think about yourself as a visionary. Those questions that I asked you. What would Maine look like if people were operating in the fullness of their power? What would this nation look like if racism didn't exist? Is it possible? I would do this work if I thought I'm just going to do this work and racism is going to exist forever. No, it doesn't have to exist. Just like it was created, it can be uncreated. It can be replaced. And some of us are going to have the mitigated gall and audacity to believe that we can organize a society that is not rooted in this notion of white supremacy, that there are some people that are more valued than others, when we know in our hearts that is not true. The question is, how do we create new frameworks? How do we create new institutions? I would argue to you that we don't even know the possibilities of that could exist if racism exists. What I know is a work day would look different for all of us. Not just Black people or people of color. We're not even understanding how the exploitation of labor, it literally was fed out of slavery and other elements of oppression that we're all still operating and sitting in every day. Some of us are in nice offices and we're sitting in comfortable buildings and we're still tired as hell. We're still working ourselves to death because we've allowed this value of the exploitation of physical labor to now be an exploitation of time and labor, and that we've normalized that. What exists if we could shift that? What would be so bad of people working 10 hours a week and making more money? It is possible. What do you think a society would look like? Let's say if people work 10, 15 hours a week, they had the rest of the time to spend with their children, their families, with themselves, to draw, to paint, we're literally working until I'm going to work until I can retire. We're not working to live, we're working to die. Most of us are dealing with health issues, heart problems. We're stressing the hell out of ourselves under the guise of I'm making a livelihood. No, you're not. We're trading off our livelihood for stuff. And I'm not raising that in a judgment because I like stuff. But I also want to reimagine, how can I create a world that I can have stuff, that I can work in a ways that are healthy and wholesome, that I create systems that my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren don't have to work themselves to death so that they can work themselves to the bone till they get 65, like my grandmother that had to leave her retirement early and was bedridden for the rest of her life and never could enjoy a single day of her retirement. What kind of life is that? We don't have to continue that. And so I'm raising this in the possibilities of the kind of world we can co-create together. And yes, we can co-create that together. And you all can co-create that with Maine. There is nowhere else but up. Can you recreate economic systems in that state? The beauty about Maine is it's small enough that I do think that it could be a model. There are systems that could be a model for the rest of the nation and ultimately the rest of the world. And so just like you had a few men, like the bottom line, let me take America. Part of the reason why I love the American Revolution, and I know I'm getting ready to go a little bit over, but I'm going to end it after this. You know, the American Revolution, I actually love the American Revolution. I love the story behind it. I love the thinking behind it, although I'm really clear about the distinctions of the hurt and the harm that happened, including to my people. But there's something really powerful in, part of what the story that gets missing is that part of it, you had a group of white men that did not come from royalty. That we know that England was a monarchy and there was a system of aristocracy, right? And so there were these white men that said, wait a minute, I ain't never gonna be a duke or earl or king. That's not my bloodline. I'm forever cut out of that. I'll never be in that, right? And so as a result, I will never be able to enjoy the fullness of the pursuit of happiness because I don't have that bloodline. Possibly I might marry in, maybe I might get a duke or earl because I did something, but for the most part, that's not that opportunity has been shut off from me just because of who I am. And as a result, what I am going to do is I've got this vision. How about we can create a whole nother nation that is separate from the monarchy, that allows me to be a king of my own destiny, that allows me to be able to create a whole nother economic system. Alexander Hamilton, to help me to create a whole nother way of looking at creating political governance systems. John Adams, George Washington, that did not exist. And so I'm putting that in context, whatever critique you may have on it, the bottom line, that was some good stuff for them. I'm saying we have the same ability to recreate and think about this ain't working for us. Let's think about new systems, a new economic system. Let's think about new systems of how we do education. We know it's not working. And we keep trying to fix that which doesn't work, when it may be calling for us in this moment to shift the frame and the paradigm, to be different. But that's going to require us being visionaries and not just responders. Although there is a need for us to respond in the moment, we often have to be putting and testing and not be afraid to fail. It's almost like sometimes those of us who have good intentions will get stuck in a quagmire that says, that may not work, that may not work. You know, if you know the story of 409, it was the 409th formula that now became the $1 million. That means a 408 failures. And so it is important for us to also give the last three things that I said. I say this about Black women all the time, but I think it's important for us to think about this for ourselves. That it is important for us to give grace to each other. That as we're doing this work, that we're all living a human life. This is a really challenging space for us. And so do we give grace for each other for our understanding? Do we give grace for each other around coming from our different backgrounds? Like, are we in a space? Now it almost seems like now we have a disagreement, and all of that means that we got to choose sides. Which team you on? The right side or the left side, right? Instead of literally being able to give each other's grace. The second thing is, are we creating space for each other? That in our work, are we creating space for those voices that have been marginalized, or those voices that we need to hear and bring to the table? And then the third thing, are we setting the pace? That sometimes setting the pace means being the outlier. It doesn't mean doing the most practical piece. It means sometimes being extraordinary. Do you know how, like nobody thought, if you read the story about Steve Jobs at Apple, nobody thought that folks were going to give their iPods to listen to music and give all of that and then have everything on one phone. They thought it was cool, but that this is the standard now. And so I think that it requires us, in setting the pace, doesn't mean that you just fall in line with whatever exists. Sometimes that means you're the outlier. That means you have to pull away from the crowd, which also makes you a target, but that's part of the process. Well, the first thing I did right was the day I started to fight. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on, hold on. I wanted to end this portion of the talk in that way because I think it's important for us to always be grounded in spirit and recognize that everything that we do, it's not just about policy, it's about people. And it's the spirit of humanity and reclaiming the spirit of humanity that's going to transform the world. It won't be just multiple transactions. When we believe, things will change. And when we believe, we will show up differently in our jobs, in our homes, in our places. And so I offer to you that we stand in the fullness of our spirit, of our human spirit, around how can we transform this world, using our vision, shifting the paradigm of what a victory looks like, using our voice, literally centering our work and our values, and using the voting as a tool, not as a way to further marginalize people, but as a tool of the promise of possibilities. And with that, I'll stop right there because I know we're going to open up for questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Brown. I would invite participants to come off mute so that we can give you a real round of applause.
Thank you.
So, thank you so much.
Thank you.
My dog's clapping too.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I hardly know where to begin. I'm Desti Homan-Sprague. I'm the Executive Director of Maine Women's Lobby. I'm so happy to welcome you here to Maine. Thank you. And thank you to Renee Goddess, our board member and member of the planning committee, who really kicked this portion of the summit off in such a powerful way. Folks, I would invite you to enter questions for Ms. Brown into the chat. I think also because we have such a smaller group, it's an opportunity for people to chime in using your voice if you want. I will just quick housekeeping. If you do want to ask a question, you can go ahead and raise your digital hand. So you click down on your reactions, raise your hand. Please do know that if you join by video, then your image and your name will be in the recording. So if you'd prefer not to have that happen, you can go ahead and put your questions in the chat. And we are thrilled to have to welcome you for the Q&A portion. So I have lots of my own questions, but I also want to be sure that we hear.
No, let's just be in discussion. There's no right or wrong question. I can just share my perspective, be it right or wrong, but I would love to be in conversation with you all.
Great.
And just your thoughts, and it may not even be a question, it may be something that came up for you or a thought you have. I would love to be in discussion with you, in conversation.
I would love to start. First, thank you so much. I am an Uber fan, and I appreciate so much the words that you gave us and all the lessons that I keep finding online from you. I am curious. So in Portland, in Maine it's small and it's large. It's a really interesting space, and things are separated regionally. So there's a lot of different pockets happening with lots of conversations. And I'm curious, as someone who considers myself a social scientist and is trying really hard to figure out how to connect large rural areas that I have no connection to, what are some of the tools and skills that I could potentially use to be able to walk into places where I'm pretty good at making connection, I'm pretty good at getting people to, I'm a performer, so I'm good at getting on my feet in that way. But really for me, I want to stop creating programs where people don't have a voice in it. I want to stop walking into places and being the person speaking and trying to do more listening. So just really looking for more tools to be able to listen better and really bring people into the work that isn't me, it's them.
So there's a couple of things. I'm going to ask you a question, but I'll tell you what I heard and I didn't hear. So a couple of things, like one, don't diminish your voice. You are the people. And so I'm raising that because we separated out that in some ways it's me, and then how can I help the people? I'm the people, right? And part of it, I have to see myself as part of the collective. And whenever I'm operating in my power, sometimes your best contribution is for people to show up, for you to show up in the fullness of who you are, and for people to see that. So don't diminish that, right? And I'm raising that because women, in many ways, because of sexism and because of how society is organized, we have been taught that the best way for us to kind of show up is not to be seen, to serve. Like to serve, because to be seen means you're doing it for yourself, right? When in fact, many of us are inspired. How many of you all are inspired by people that you saw and you heard, that you saw them and you heard them? And so I just want to offer to you, don't diminish the power of presence, that being present with people makes a difference. The second thing, in terms of, I heard you with the tools, I don't want to overlook that, but the tools in doing that is, I was like, use from the place of where you have your abundance. You are an artist, right? And so your art, and it's all over you, right? And so show up in the spaces in your offering, right? Yes. And so in your listening, if you're showing up in your offering, right, that oftentimes that can create a space. There's no other space, in my opinion, that can shift dynamics for people to be open and touched to their humanity, like the arts. Matter of fact, I normally start my talks with singing, and I'll end, but I usually start them. This, I felt the spirit of ending it, and not starting, because I felt like your art had opened up a way. It had touched a space for me, and I think for others. And the reason why I start with art, I usually start with song or poetry or something that I think there's a heart opening, that when you're creating that space, it opens up the heart. So I'm just going to say, use from the place in which where your abundance comes from. You are an artist. Not saying that that's all you are, but I'm saying that there's nothing wrong with that. So showing up in those spaces and connect with others that are in alignment with you. Don't despise small beginnings. The bottom line is, mighty rivers are filled drop by drop. So in communities that actually you have the opportunity to start with 4 people, 5 people, 6 people, that's how change happens. And so I think, I am a spirit person. I feel like spirit will tell you and lead you to the spaces of where you need to go. I don't think there's any right or wrong way of doing it. I think you use the tools that you know how to do. And I think a couple of ways to do it is find out the people who are in those communities. I operate in a community that I'm not smarter than the people that are already there. And that there's somebody in that community that's already thinking about what I'm thinking about. My responsibility is to find them. It's kind of like Carmen Sandiego. Where are they? Right. And so I'm trying to find them and connect with them. And so I would say, find your tribe, connect with people. And it might be very unlikely. It'll be interesting. You might be at a coffee shop. Coffee shops are the best. Bakeries and coffee shops are the best. Places where people are coming in community, where they're not coming because of political ideology necessarily, but they're just coming because they're just coming to have a human experience. I just want a cup of coffee, right? Or I just want these cool donuts. They have a certain kind of way that they actually are tapped into community, particularly places that have been there for a long time. Because usually many of them are sustaining not because they've gotten rich at having a coffee shop there for 50 years. There's a certain kind of commitment they have about being embedded in community, which is why I love to patronize those spaces. And so I would say that those spaces are usually community spaces because they've been community supported, and they're usually there even as a part of, they see themselves as a larger, broader community. And so those are just kind of some of the pieces that I would think about, like connecting with people who are already doing the work, show up with your offering of what you are good at, right? And then be willing. And sometimes I think we will want the big bang event, when I'll just share this real quick. And I know there are other questions, but I'll just share this quick. There's a woman, I always talk about her, Miss Carolyn in Selma, Alabama, where I was my first organizing. I was organizing a public housing community to establish a residence council. And so everybody told me I need to get because nobody was really coming to the meetings. And everybody told me I needed to talk to Miss Carolyn to get her. And so, I was Miss Energetic, and I had my little not notepad, what do you call it? Clipboard. And I go to Miss Carolyn's house. And when I got there, she told me to come in. I got in, and she ignored everything I said and was talking about young wrestlers. Actually started talking over me. It was like, did you see what Miss Chancellor did today? And I was like, I'm trying. She was like, no, let me tell you what Victor did and Nikki did today, honey. And did you want some lemonade? And then she'd go give me some lemonade. Well, I got some food. I got some lunch. Let me give you some of this. I made some sandwiches. And so she would literally like talk over me, trying to tell her about my little campaign I was on. And so I was like, okay, I'm not gonna give up. I went back the next week. I went by the next week. I don't know how long that went on. I know it went on for maybe 8-9 weeks. I don't even know. To be honest with you, I lost track. And so I would go by there every day. It'd be the same thing. I go by there, and I had to look at a young wrestler. So one day I would go in, and I had to look at young wrestlers, and she'd give me something to drink, and we talk about what Victor and Nikki did that day. And one day I went, and I had my notepad with me. I'm my clipboard in my bag. Right. And because I'm a creature of habit, when I would go out to talk to people, I'll have my clipboard. But when I got to Miss Carolyn's house, I just went on, put my clipboard in my book bag, went to the door, and I'm walking in the house. What happened with Miss Chancellor today, Miss Carolyn? So I go sit down. Right? I'm like, what happened? And she looks at me and she was like, where your clipboard? I said, excuse me. She was like, ain't you supposed to be out here working? Yes, ma'am. She was like, well, aren't you trying to sign people up for your thing? And I was like, yes, ma'am. Well, give me your clipboard so I can sign it. Don't you want me to sign it? And so I signed it, right? That is the most valuable organizing lesson I have ever received. What I realized is she was teaching me the day that I showed up to her place, that I absolutely had no care whether she signed my piece, but I showed up for her is the day that she recognized was the day to organize her. Our next meeting, it was wall-to-wall people. which was in 3 days. My point is sometimes people just need to be seen and heard and affirmed in that. And so as you are organizing, don't get caught up in the numbers. Don't get caught up in what people want. People will tell you if you want what they want. If you have the humility and the patience to listen and to just be in community and relationship with them. You're welcome. Thank you for the question.
I see a question here in the chat. Comment, I'm so intrigued by your story about the Revolutionary War and wonder if you have more to share or say about how we can think about connecting our histories that involve so much hurt and harm and death and erasure, and then also good things, like how we hold those both together and learn from them.
You know, I think the best way I can say that is, isn't that the fullness of the life experience? You know, that as a human being, I've had to learn how to hold pain and joy and when to release it and when to be in it. And so we've created this artificial construct that there's going to be some aspect of life that is going to be free of hurt, harm, and pain, and free of, you know, and that's just not been my experience. And because of that, I have to find ways, right, that that I see myself as an alchemist. That I'm go back to my grandmama, because I am, like I told y'all, I'm a grandmother's person. My grandmother would used to say, it used to aggravate me, but I get it now. She would just say, what the devil meant for harm, God will use for your good. And I was like, I don't want to hear that right now, grandma, right? But I understand that. I understand that in the context of, you're absolutely right. Thank you for the question. There's so much hurt and harm and pain that happened in the establishment of this country, from the genocide of indigenous people to the enslavement of my ancestors to the exploitation of so millions of others. But that in itself isn't the whole story, right? There are other elements of the story as well. And so for me, you know, what I do is I try to, in my work, I do two things. One, I don't come with a space of even in the work that I do in terms of voting work, I don't say, oh, it's easy, let's just do this or whatever. No, I'm really honest about even voting. I am the first person to tell you that I don't think that voting is a panacea to anything. I don't believe that voting is going to bring about the liberation that I desire. What I do believe is that voting is a harm reduction strategy. And because of that, you know, that anything that is going to reduce the harm gives people more grace and space to actually set the pace and to radically reimagine what I talked about earlier. And so part of the way that I approach my work is literally being able to call out the atrocities and the pain in this circumstance. And maybe, and I'm glad you raised it, you know, I am the first one to talk about the genocide that happened in the founding of America, and the exploitation of what happened in enslavement, and still believe that there are reparations that are needed, required, and deserved based on that circumstance, right? But I'm also able to recognize the complexity and the nuance of human life and human beings. And so I think we always have to find space that we're looking at things from this prism of humanity, that part of what's mixed up in a human experience is at some point, all of us are going to have heartbreak. We've had a heartbreak. At some point, all of us are going to fall in love with something or somebody, right? At some point, all of us are going to feel what it means to lose somebody you love. All of us are going to feel how to gain somebody in our lives that we didn't see, a little baby little person that just steals our heart that didn't even exist 6 months ago. Like how you just came in and just stole my whole heart. I didn't know you. You didn't even exist. You're a whole new being, right? And my point is, part of the complexity of the human experience is being able to literally be able to hold those things that we have to figure out how to hold, you know, and what do we do with them? Because there's some things that have to be released because of the pain that happened in America that was afflicted. I see that now as a lesson of what happens when you don't center the fullness and the wholeness of humanity. And because of that, I desire to have a vision that is far, far beyond that vision. That vision doesn't work for me, right? I can learn. There are things that are instructive. I think the whole notion of the idea of democracy, I think the Declaration of Independence is absolutely amazing. Right? If you listen to it, that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that is amazing. The problem was that the values of that were not embedded in the hearts of those men that said that other than for themselves. And so, but the value, but the context itself, yeah, I want to live in a world that I have the pursuit that I recognize that all human beings are created equal and endowed by their creator. Absolutely. Right. But there are people who said that did not believe that. There were some that possibly did. I don't know. I wasn't there. But what we do know is we see the evidence of what happens when there's a misalignment with values and when humanity, when your theory or your ideology means one way, but then your value of humanity means something else. What I am saying is I'm astute enough to really recognize the power and the truth of what it is that they were saying, that there is truth in this notion of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You know, when you actually do some research around it, that there was an argument where it was really around the pursuit of, it was an argument around whether that should be around prosperity or happiness. And as a result, it was that won out, because there were those who were saying, I can't even remember who it was, but we're leading this whole piece like we want to make money, which we've seen where that's led us, right? But my point to you is, thank you for the question. But what I do is I've decided that I can, just like I can create and inform myself with best practices, sometimes even from people that I don't align with, but that I can actually see the truth, or I can see the value in what is said or what has been laid out. I hope that's helpful.
So we have a few other questions in the chat, but if folks are interested in coming off mute and posing your questions, Ms. Brown, I'd welcome that. We also, another one of the questions I think is really well aligned to what you were just talking about, and holding sort of the sorrow and joy of election work together when you know, we often put so much labor into them and then sometimes lose, or even when we win, getting those harm reduction candidates, and how we sort of overcome the sorrow of that and hold the long-term vision, I think is really hard for some folks.
Oh, it is hard. But listen, let me say this. I am a Black woman from the Deep South. If I got off beat because of disappointments, I've not had the luxury of having the best the best political candidates. I am in a country that every day I'm fighting. I don't know whether it even likes me. I am in a nation that didn't even recognize my humanity, that didn't even believe that. I'm in a conversation right now, which I'm at a conversation of whether Black people should have access to voting in 2021. Do you know how absurd that is? Right. My point is that those of us that are visionaries have to be relentless with the vision, which is why you brought up the American Revolution, that there were those that said the monarchy at the time, and I'm putting it in perspective because I want us to see, at the time, the monarchy was the superpower in the world. England was the superpower in the world. Right. And so there were some folks who had a vision, and this isn't about them. I'm raising this in a context for us to see, had a vision of creating something different. What I am saying is that we too have to move in that space and recognize, it's kind of like what I'm saying about the complexity of life, of where pain, and we have to recognize that winning requires losses. How do I know that? Ask somebody who's made it to the Super Bowl. Right. Ask athletes. The top athlete, most of the top athletes say that the defining moment for them, Michael Jordan, I saw with Kobe Bryant, was that moment where they either lost or they got kicked off of a team. And they had to come back. They had to come back with a vengeance. They had to come back and go somewhere deeper, because it forces you to go somewhere deeper. And so I understand how upsetting. I ran for public office 3 times and lost all 3 times. Right. And so I understand how disappointing and upsetting it is to not win. But that's why one of my points in the V strategy was around shifting how you see what a victory is. If I only see victory as capturing the seat, I will miss what the ultimate victory is. For example, in Georgia, we were extremely disappointed that Stacey Abrams didn't win in 2018. And so we could have been paralyzed and say, they stole the election. We did all of this. They stole the election. But what happened in 2020? Not only did we actually make history by flipping the state the first time in 20 years, right? But we also captured 2 U.S. Senate seats. That's like impossible. 5 days after New Year's, where it's cold, and we don't do cold well in the South. My point to you is that literally, I think the opportunity is there's 3 quick points. The first point is shift the way that we've got to shift our paradigm of what a victory is, that we have to recognize we're in protracted struggle. And when you're in protracted struggle, it's not just about the transaction, it's about the transformation that happens along the process. And so whenever you are getting more people engaged in the process, that even if you don't capture the seat, you will eventually capture the seat when you got more people on your side. And so you have to literally build on that base and see the victory in that way look very different. It didn't look like you captured the seat. What it does look like is you captured the heart and the minds of people, right? And the question is, how do you build from that? Your base build. And the second piece that I think is really important for us to really recognize is, what are we trying to shift and change? And sometimes that requires that the systems that we have are just never going to yield what it is that we desire. That we have to be honest and have an honest assessment. Is this really what we want, or are we getting caught up in the red and the blue thing? Right? Are we getting caught up in the politics of winning instead of literally the purpose of the win? And so can we see a victory in a different way? So I've got 1,000 people over here that voted and that candidate didn't win, but those 1,000 people can actually be organized in a way that it doesn't matter who's in that office, in that seat or not. They can actually determine what policy that person, because they know those 1,000 people are coming at them. And so you shift the focal point difference. You shift how you actually see your strategy. Doesn't mean you lost. It just means that what you saw as a victory may have shifted. Those 1,000 people show up to a city council meeting. Guess what? The whole agenda is going to shift. And that ultimately what we wanted. And so my point is, I think that's the second point that I want to think about is, how do you use and recognize the power that you do have to shift? Right. And then the third piece, which goes back to, and I'm going to keep saying it like a broken record, radically reimagining. That part of what we have to really understand is sometimes these constructs are not going to give us what we want. And sometimes our strategy is not going to give us what we want, because our strategy is in response. It is not rooted in the reimagining. And that when we are reimagining, we should expect that there's going to be resistance. That is a part of the process. That's what a rubber band is. Right? But the power is in the resistance. And so if we continue to resist and continue to get more people engaged and to continue to base build, then ultimately, and create the better candidates and to create a pipeline and bring more people into the civic engagement process, I can guarantee you this, things will change. And so we got to stop looking at change as this transaction of who wins an office. We have to look at the totality of what it means to actually in civic engagement around bringing the change, where that it requires a change in the behavior of the electorate and how they see themselves as part of the process, a change of the way that we see how we engage in the process in itself. And 3, what opportunities and possibilities exist when we get more people engaged? Different kind of candidates, different approaches, all of those things. Hope that's helpful.
Gorgeous. We have one more question. I see your hand raised. Sorry.
Oh, I see you, Jane. That's wonderful. That's my senator.
Is that Audra? You have your hand raised?
It's Aura. Thank you.
Oh, Aura, I'm sorry. Your
That's
hidden
okay.
behind me.
Hi, Ms. Brown. I'm nervous to ask you in person, but I'd rather do that than write so I'm going to try my best to explain my question. I was wondering if you had any insight on productive processes or reframing when we have the outcry from status quo politicians or the media, about movements being divisive and the pushback by communities resisting cultural change to our institutions. I'm struggling with sometimes that dichotomy of wanting to move folks along, which is part of the work towards systemic change, and the limits of our collective emotional ability to do that and desire to move forward with the change and the work without always being able to bring everyone along. So any thoughts on that would be so wonderful.
Absolutely. One, thank you for that question. If I had the right answer to it, I would probably be a zillionaire right now, since we passed trillion, right? But I don't even want to be there. But What I will say, and it is such a really great, I'm really grateful for the question. It's really a great question, because that is the question that we all, those of us that are change agents, are always like, we come up against, right? You know, it's always around the measure of change, and then you hit this wall of, how can I bring people along, right? And so I think there's a couple of things. I think, and it goes back to the first couple of the V's that I say. I like acronyms, and I like putting things in V's, but I'm not one of those people that just make it up. I literally put thought into thinking about it. I think it's really important that that you are really grounded in what your vision is, because sometimes that's all you're gonna have. I'm just gonna be honest. You know, that oftentimes being a visionary can be a lonely place, because you're seeing sometimes what others can't see, and you're trying to get them to see what you see, but they got a different lens. And it doesn't mean they're right, doesn't mean they're wrong. They've got different prescription glasses on than you. Right. And so your goal is to try to help kind of tweak the best circumstances to get them to see it. I think there's a couple of mistakes that we often make. Is one, we make the mistake of believing that we need everybody to be on board. Right. And so kind of disabuse yourself of that need and release that literally a committed few can change the entire dynamic of anything, systems, companies, organizations, institutions. And so one, you know, or I think it's important, it's kind of like the same thing that I said to Renee earlier, it's like, find your tribe, find where there is alignment, where you've got other people that are aligned with you and want to move in that way. And so that one, you have a support system, but that you're creating kind of this energy, you're breaking some things through. Secondly, don't make the assumption that because people don't agree with you right now, that they won't agree with you at some point. You know, there are people that told me things that I was adamant about, right? I was adamant against or adamant about. And after I had either circumstances or experiences, or sometimes I just need to sit and it started making sense to me. I was like, oh, that's what they were saying, right? And so my point is, if you are planting good seeds, you have to trust, which is my third point to you, the process, that good seeds planted in the right conditions on good soil. Just because you don't see the plant yet doesn't mean something ain't happening up under the soil. Right? There's a whole lot of things. There are weeks that go by between you putting a seed in soil. And what do you do when you put a seed in soil? It needs some sunlight. You don't see nothing happening, but you know it needs some sunlight. You need some water. You don't see nothing happening. It ain't no plant yet. But a good farmer trusts the process. They trust that if I put good seeds on good soil and I nurture it, even when I don't see nothing happening, and I water it with good information, when I provide sun or affirmation or positive opportunities for it, when I create space for it, sometimes I got to break up the soil so that the conditions, right? Sometimes I got to agitate it. I got to agitate the soil so those worms can move around, right? Whatever those things, my point is, or a part of the process is you got to trust the process. You got to recognize that as you are, that anytime we're really trying to make substantial change, that part of the process is resistance. If there's no resistance, there's normally no change. I'm just gonna be honest, right? That's what change, almost kind of a precursor to change is. There's some resistance because we're changing. It's change, right? And so I say that, and I would say stay true to yourself around whatever this is, and also remain open. You know, sometimes you have a good idea, but it's not. I always say this: culture will eat strategy for breakfast. Right? Sometimes you have a good, I can have on a really, really ugly dress, right? And my partner may say something a way to me and it would devastate me, right? My girlfriend might be able to say it to me in a way, the same thing, and it may make me look at the dress a little bit different. Or it may make me say, you know what, this is ugly, but I like it. I'm aware, right? Whatever the case may be. My point is the way sometimes we have to deliver things in a way that people can hear us. And so oftentimes we will become ideologues, so we'll get very self-righteous around, I've got the right position. And because I have the right position, then it should make sense to you, right? And so there's a time and a place for that. But sometimes you would be amazed at sometimes just listening to people that are differing from you and not trying to evangelize them. I do it all the time. People will say, well, I don't believe in vote. That's okay. Well, tell me. I'd love to hear me. Tell me what you care about. It's like, I don't care about voting. I was like, yeah, we ain't talking about voting. Just tell me what you care about. And then I'm literally listening to them. And then I've got people I've got people on tape that will come back and say, well, I'm ready to register. Right. And I didn't even bring up voting. My point is, it's the same thing that I talked about Ms. Carolyn earlier. So there are ways, I think, when you're looking at this work and the way that you stay grounded, I think is one, you've got to literally be really clear about visioning and revisiting that constantly. And you have to feed your soul. That seed that you have to nurture it. You have to even nurture it for yourself. Right? You have to continuously kind of nurture and check in with it. And then small and mighty rivers are filled drop by drop. A small committed few, I can tell you about a few wild women throughout history that have shifted the whole course of history just because they had the audacity to challenge systems, even though at the time it didn't seem like that they were victorious. Hope that's helpful.
Thank you.
I think on that note, this is thank you for helping plant these seeds and water these seeds and give us all hope as we go into the dark Maine, the dark season here in Maine. Thank you so much for your wisdom today. And again, I would invite the rest of the folks to go ahead and come off mute and give a big round of applause to Ms. LaTosha Brown.
Yes. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
I thank you so much. This meant a lot to us and we appreciate you.
Well, women of Maine, y'all can do it. I'm not just talking. This is our moment. I don't know if people are going to be talking about 2013 or 2003. Who even knows what was happening in 2003? What I do know for sure is people will be 100 years from now, they will be talking about this period of time. This is a resetting moment. What we saw happen in the political space, and all of that is not by accident. There's a reordering, there's a realignment. And so the question is, what are we going to do? How are we going to take advantage of this moment in time that we find ourselves that is going to set the course for the next 100 years? We know that for sure. And so it's going to require us to be bold. It's going to require us to be imaginative. It's going to require us to even move outside of our comfort zone, because I do believe the possibilities exist. Thank you, Desti. I'm sorry. She was like, I'm trying to end it. And here she goes.
I mean, you could keep on going. How long?
No, I'm respecting the process. I just wanted to offer that. Because I see so much, I'm looking at the faces and I see so much power and beauty on here. I really wish we understood the power and the beauty of our humanity to change. It really is. We're not as powerless as people want us to think. And there were systems that were designed to make us feel powerless. But there's enough people on this right now, literally, y'all could change the course of Maine. And I'm not just saying that, it's the truth. We've seen that over and over again in history. It's never the thousands that change things. It is always the committed few visionaries that change the course of history. It has always been the case. And so there's enough of you all on here right now that you all could set a whole new course for the state of Maine.
And I'll add personal context to that and say I wouldn't have become a board member if I honestly didn't believe that or see the hope and possibility of what's to come. This organization is intense. It has incredible power. And the work that we are doing and will continue to do, absolutely.
That's right.
That's
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Be patient with yourself.